This is my first crack at collective action problems, so it might be a bit rough. These are Enga warriors coming in to ask for compensation after a war. Okay, so there's always been some misunderstanding between biologists and anthropologists about the nature of reciprocity. And in the 70s, two major models emerged. They have Bob Trivers, The Evolution of Reciprocal Altruism, which I'm sure you all know. It has an economic focus. The second one is from Marshall Solins, The Sociology of Primitive Exchange. And for Solins, the action is in the relationship. You secure the relationship, you don't worry so much about economics. So I want to look at the implication of some of these for collective action in warfare. Okay, so Trivers, should this be bopping around like this? It just seems to be wiggling around a lot. Okay, fine. Thank you. So, all right, so in Trivers' model, as you know, the individual makes sacrifice for the other in expectation of a greater return in the future, overall net benefit. He relates this to selection for moral behavior, ability to calculate, and other cognitive dispositions. It's been modeled by iterated prisoner's dilemma, and the free rider problem is controlled through punishment. Solins is very different. Solins argues that the economic and the social are entwined and the social is dominant. There are many forms of cooperation and reciprocity, and he relates them to kinship, wealth, and morality, saying that certain kinds are within group, and then it gets more balanced as you move out group, and then it can become negative if you're dealing with other groups. Okay, so now when relationships are in the driver's seat, this is really ideal to manage risk. People secure in relationships. So these are some points that Solins made, that the terms of reciprocity is that the one who has gives to the one who's in need, provided the need is real. Returns are not stipulated by time, quality, or quantity, but by need and ability to fill it. And what really makes this work is the cost of the giver is often small in relation to the benefit to the receiver. So if you have a huge chunk of meat and someone's really hungry, it's a low cost to you and a big help to them. At the moment in Papua New Guinea with El Nino, there are 2 million people who have total failure of water and crops due to frost and drought. And here are some pictures. This guy has come down from the high areas and said, "You must help us or we will die." Australian media, who loves to sort of dramatize Papua New Guinea, says there's going to be fighting, there's going to be a bloodbath. But as all through history, not at all. There is the most warmth, altruism, and taking in of these 2 million people in lower areas where people have resources. So it's very important to manage risk. This is a picture of the people who were begging in the other slide, and then when their hosts 8 years later needed help with the compensation, they slaughtered their pigs and came with the meat jacket to help out with the payment. So it's very important, Solins' generalized reciprocity for managing risk, because if the haves give to the have-nots, it covers unpredictable losses. Storing in social relationships means that you select a wide range of partners with different skills to cover your many needs. The vague terms of the relationship that not stipulated by time, quality, or quantity adjust returns to need, and the cost to the giver is often small relative to the benefit to the receiver. And one characteristics of people, we know this because we all buy insurance. we secure against rare life-threatening events. We don't think so much in terms of balance. We think in terms of having things that will secure us when push comes to shove. So, yeah. So the implications of economic versus relationship-centered models for collective action. Generally, for reciprocal altruism, punishment controls free riding. There are big problems with this in many cases, particularly for warfare. Punishment offends and it disrupts cooperation in small-scale societies. You don't see it a lot except in dyads. You see it a lot in dyads, but not otherwise. Old grudges are infinitely retrievable. There's no punishment with impunity. Eventually, someone is going to throw the wrench in someone else's game if they've been punished. And in warfare, and people talk about this all the time, risk of unfriendly, friendly fire. If somebody's really annoyed with you, they may just bump you off during a raid or war. So probably punishment is applicable in some societies with armies or some raiding societies, but in many not. Now, if you have more generalized reciprocity, where relationships profoundly affect cooperation, collective action problems are reduced by building institutions to, one, reduce costs for participants in the game, so it's cheaper to join in, and then changing the game so it's less risky. And this has been modeled by Heckathorn. The point I want to make here, the main point, is that the institutions developed to do these two things are applicable to many other problems, and I think lead to social complexity. So warfare can lead to social complexity. And that's what I want to show with the Enga. So this is what we're looking at today is very different than South America, and collective action problems in warfare are really cultural specific. So the Enga are highland horticulturalists, subsist mostly on sweet potato and pigs. They have two strategies. One is a corporate group strategies, clans of 500 to 800. Women work in the private realm, men in the public. And the clan takes care of everyone's needs. Fierce status competition between men in exchange, and it's labor, not land, that's short. There's plenty of land, but not enough people to farm it. So they have to get wealth from neighboring groups. And then, whoops, where did I do that? Oh yeah, okay, the network strategy down here, although they're strong corporate groups, they also have a network strategy where they draw on the resources of people related through marriage who may be 50, 100 miles away. And these two strategies are always conflicting, loyalty to your own group and to your network. Okay, so ceremonial change is valued most highly. This guy here, Yoponda Kep with the feathers, is giving away all these pigs, and the pigs just keep going. Finance for exchange, people can't raise all these pigs. They can raise maybe 7 in their house, comes from other groups, other relatives who lend them and then have them paid back at a later date. Balance of power is critical for this, because if you give someone your pigs and you're not equal, they can say, you're not getting them back, tough luck. So people are always concerned with balance, and warfare establishes balance after insult or injury, and then exchange flows again. It also includes other economic agendas. So there's a big conflict between corporate and network group strategies. As the Enga say, we marry the people we fight. If you damage your neighbors who you're fighting, you damage your own social ties. So there's a dilemma there. So the nature of warfare is attack on one clan member is considered to be attack on the entire clan. There's no raiding. The war takes place on the battlefield between clans of about 500 people. Usually 2 to 4 men are killed. I've recorded wars with up to 20. There are few spoils of war. Wars last a few days to a few weeks. Women and children are out of the picture. They take off. And at the end, land may be taken to punish, but it's always contested. Peacemaking always follows war. And so here are some of the measures to reduce the cost for the participants, to promote collective action. It begins with a clan meeting where the clan decides whether to fight or pay compensation. 80-90% of the time they pay. If they want to fight, each man expresses what that will do to his social ties and whether he wants it or not. History really matters. They look back 8 to 9 generations to see what war has done to them, and they evaluate in those terms. And they discuss costs and benefits in the historical perspective, and if they want to go fight, then they call up all the atrocities of history and really get people aroused. And here are some old guys chewing the fat about history. And then there's a consensus mediated by the leader, usually in the interest of himself. And all of the reason to go to war is phrased in reactive terms, in emotional terms. However, the leader usually has proactive strategies, and you know he does because people sometimes talk around the edges as to what those might be. And then men who have a conflict of interest, they have in-laws in the clan they're going to fight, they withdraw from the battle plan. So that lowers their costs. And in the war, they can stay in the back. And then you have rituals to accept allies, because accepting allies complicates the war, and sometimes they simply reject allies who want to come. So the rituals of war starts off with songs and insults, particularly dehumanizing the enemy. They go through past atrocities. They call up the pain. And the pain is great. When someone dies in war, they take an axe and they cut off their finger because the physical pain will counteract the emotional pain. So deeply do they feel it. And they have fight magic, a lot of fight magic, Dominique, to instill confidence. And then every man appeals on the battlefield, insults are heard. The cadence is just like a sports match. You could feel the ecstasy of brotherhood, good fighters in the front line, poor ones in the back, glee over killing, and excruciating pain for those who lose. And if things are going bad for a side, they have these rallies where they get all the fighters together. They confess every bad feeling or thought or action they've done to each other. They cleanse themselves and then go back to fight again. They also have cleansing sessions for those who've killed. So what about reluctant or poor fighters, free riders? There are no rewards for the good fighters other than reputation, respect, don't mess with me. Poor warriors are liabilities in the front line. A lot of these guys have poor eyesight. They can't fight well. So people recognize this. They realize that they have other skills and other areas of life to give. And during the war, they may warn, provide food, arrows, remove bodies from the field. And in the end, they contribute to the compensation. People accept them. If you have slackers in all areas, these guys are not punished. They lose status, perks, privileges, power, and chances for polygyny, but they're not punished. People just ignore them. They sideline them. So that's how to reduce costs inside the game, and this is how people reduce the cost of the game. I've done a lot of work on how these rules came about, and I think it's because neighbors fight. They were actually able to construct some of these rules. They don't harm women and children. They don't burn women's houses. They don't kill on another clan's land. They don't finish off the wounded or mutilate corpses. They don't kill the big men who will mediate peace. They don't fight in the wars of others except close relatives. They don't kill enemy outside the battle area, hunt down war refugees. There are no material rewards for warriors, okay? And they don't take revenge after peace has been declared. Don't take spoils of war. And they warn, if you take land, you will bring trouble. So these are a set of rules, and people discuss these all the time, and in making peace they discuss them. So they're very real. They're not things that I have dreamed up. And then you have peacemaking after all wars, multiple meetings. and food sharing with the enemy to rehumanize them. Every time someone has food, they bring it over to the enemy. Major collective action problem in war here is raising the compensation. People don't like to give away their precious pigs. They meet in sessions for 1 to 3 years until they get enough pigs. Every man is cajoled to contribute, but if you're generous, there's a lot of status. So some men give a lot more, gain reputation. And the rules of warfare are, if they've been broken, peace is much harder to negotiate. And okay, so in 1990s, exciting times came under money and guns, and you began to have mercenaries and an arms race. I used to go to have lunch at a war and watch the war with my sandwich from the hilltop, and then suddenly the M16s were in there, and the end of that. Elders lose control, the young bucks with guns got control. History was totally ignored because they didn't know the history. The clan no longer steers the war, it's the young guys. And gangs of Rambos formed from many clans. These guys are hamming it up for me. I met them on the road, and they were doing the show. So, as you can see, most of the rules with the gun, with the mercenary, disappeared. And the cost of collective action in war just soared. And men just refused to fight at that point. It was too high. They began to seek peaceful institutions, calling on the clan meetings, organizing compensation, openness and confession, mediation. I interviewed 80 men, 77 from very different clans were no longer to take the risk of war. Here's a retired Rambo, Peter Pundu. Pundu means trouble. He was a bad one, no longer. And I won't go through this because there's no time, but basically by 2010, warfare and the number killed had decreased greatly. So the other great movement was people formed these legally registered associations with complex charters written by people who were lawyers in their tribes to fight violence. Here are the guys on the ground, and the guys who wrote the charters were in black suits. And interestingly, they called on the origin myth to unite 10 to 20 clans at the tribal level. Tribes had never cooperated before. And they wrote their charters, and they agreed that they would not allow war and they would solve problems peacefully within the clan. It's been amazingly effective. And then in this year, when I was there, enter the cell phone, and you have guerrilla warfare. So the Rambos turn to guerrilla tactics. They locate people on the phone they want to kill. They go in, they kill anybody who's there. They'll shoot women and babies and men to get their person. And they started a reign of terror where they're mutilating, eating corpses. And for the first time, these tribal associations are getting these guys and turning them over to the law, something that's never happened in Enga history. So you can see the sides. And then, so the institutions developed for collective action and warfare have been, 1 minute, I'll make it, applied elsewhere to HIV/AIDS, and people see this as a war. And here is an example of the charter. This is the first point. There are 14 points, but we, the Tambukins of the Akan tribe, formed an organization known as the Akan Tambukin Gupela Sit-Down Peace Movement. The Tambukin people are people who identify themselves as belonging to one common ancestry. 4 councillors represent them in 2 local governments. The population figure is about 10,000 people. In keeping with the spirit of the charter of the constitution of our organization, we have resolved that combating AIDS shall be a first priority. In line with our culture and tradition, we tend to make AIDS an open disease like all other disease, past and present. To see the disease as individual and private and to be isolated from the mainstream of our society contradicts our traditional sense of community, of openness. It should be made public and should be of public concern. So they are taking these institutions they used related to war, and they are applying them to deal with modern problems. So the takeaway is, when the emphasis is on relationships in reciprocity and collective action, two ways to reduce the costs and make collective action possible are to reduce costs for participants in the game and change the game. And then that institutions built in the service of collective action for war may also be used in the service of other collective action problems. And from collective action in war to fighting HIV/AIDS, who knows what I'm going to see next year. That's all.
Thanks, Polly. That was just an inspirational talk and really amazing to hear your perspective of watching all these changes over the past couple of decades. I just had a question, two questions that are actually related. One, when you talked about the traditional patterns, you mentioned that there were no or very few small raids. And I think that's sort of an unusual feature in small-scale warfare, because you do find small raids quite commonly. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how they prevented those, as well as what the enforcement mechanisms were for the traditional rules, like don't burn women's huts, don't mutilate corpse. How did society prevent people from doing those?
Yeah, I think, well, I hope I can answer them. First of all, raids were not permitted. If anyone went on a raid, the rest of the clan would execute very big sanctions, because a war cannot happen without the entire clan meeting, discussing costs, benefits, and drawing out a battle plan on a location. Okay, and the second thing is the rules. There are a couple things. First of all, when it came to compensation, if you broke the rules, peacemaking was hard and you really had to pay. So that was a form of punishment for the other clan of breaking the rules. The other thing that drove it was reputation. If you got a reputation for breaking the rules of warfare, people would not want to exchange with you. People don't trust you. So it's a really big deal. People talk about these rules being broken all the time. And if people break the rules, it's one reason why these associations will turn them over to the law now. So punishment. Yeah.
Hi, Polly. Thanks. I was just curious. I kept comparing your experiences in field work, excuse me, with Kim's experience in the Amazon. And I was wondering if resource uncertainty is a reason why you see more cooperative behavior, seemingly cooperative behavior in your case study in comparison to what Kim talked about yesterday, and why maybe you don't see raids and why raids are considered.
I think it's quite the opposite. In New Guinea, anything you stick in the ground grows. Nobody's hungry. There are plenty of resources. There's more land than there are people to farm it. So labor is short. So it's not, resource scarcity is not in the picture. Peace is always made. I'm not saying it's not economic. It's all about exchange, about the strategies of big men to cut off another big man, to do this, to do that. There are economic and political strategies big time in the war. It's just not about acquiring resources.
So when they came down from the upper mountains because they were starving, it was because they had enough people to farm the land up there?
No, when I mean, it's just incredible. Everything is parched. Everything is gone in the high altitudes. And for many centuries, because frost is regular, people in the high areas have had relationships, mutual reciprocal relations with people in the low areas, and that they can come down when they're in need and be helped. And then when they go back and the people in the low area need pigs for their compensation payment, they bring them down and they pay them back. This may be 6 years later. Yeah. So it's a mechanism. We know it's been going on for 400 years at least. Yeah.
Could you go into a little more detail about the 10 to 20% of the cases where the clan chose to fight?
Why they choose to fight? Yeah. It's when they call it, in the pidgin word, they call it trouble fighting. They see fighting as a last resort to solving problems that cannot be solved by other means. And when real atrocities have been created, they try to fight, but also sometimes they fight just to make exchange ties when they make peace. So often they have a war for a few days, maybe someone's killed, and then they have exchanges, and then the bonds between the two clans are renewed. It's very complex. A lot of times it's strategies of big men and their vast exchange networks to block arrival
And then how do
by
they
instigating.
restrain the I'm going to call them soldiers, I'm going to use my terms, but how do they restrain the fighters once they've sort of built them up through myths and emotions to go out and fight?
Oh, everyone's fighting. Every man is out on the field.
But how do they practice restraint?
Restraint, well, the problem is sometimes they don't, and that's when you get these wars that become revenge and runaway aggression. But otherwise, all these guys have gone through 10 years of bachelor's cults, and they're not allowed to marry till they finish that. So the young guys are highly disciplined and afraid of the guys. And it would usually be the young unmarried men who get unrestrained, and then they know that they're going to be kept in the bachelor's cults for another 5 years and not allowed to marry. Yeah.